Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Narayan Rao Kovur. Today in this video, we are going to understand the Keynesian theory of determination of national income in a two-sector model or saving investment model. The Keynesian theory of determination of national income in a two-sector model is the simplest representation of Keynesian economics, excluding government sector and also foreign sector. So equilibrium level of national income is determined where aggregate demand is equal to that means C plus I. So aggregate supply that means C plus S, or intended savings is equal to intended investment. Intended means anticipated or expected or planned. So intended savings is equal to intended investment. That is, when AD is equal to AS, aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. That means C plus I is equal to C plus S. Therefore, I is equal to S. Investment is equal to savings, or savings is equal to investment. The Keynesian theory of determination of national income can be explained with the help of diagram in two models. One is aggregate demand and aggregate supply model, and second one is savings and investment model or leakages and injection model. So now let us examine the Keynesian theory of determination of national income explained with the help of diagram. So in panel A, in terms of aggregate demand and aggregate supply model, first so draw L shape, mark YOX, and aggregate demand is measured on Y axis and income or output is measured on X axis. First to draw consumption line. This is called C, consumption line. And next draw AS is equal to C plus S, aggregate supply line. That is 45-degree line. AS is equal to C plus S. Next, draw new aggregate demand. That is, aggregate demand is C plus I. When investment added to consumption, the aggregate demand line shifted from C to, that is AD, aggregate demand is equal to C plus I. Original consumption line is this one. When investment is added, the new aggregate demand is, this is new aggregate demand. AD is equal to C plus I. So here aggregate demand and aggregate supply both are equal at point E. Next, their income is determined or output is determined, that is Y naught. So here this is point A, that is aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply. That is determination of national income is Y1. This is B, aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply. Determination of national income is Y2. This is called panel A to explain determination of national income with the help of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Right. We will examine point by point. So regarding this aggregate demand and aggregate supply model, the demand curve is linear and positively sloped, indicating as the level of income rises, AD also rises. This is the aggregate demand line. This is the aggregate demand line or aggregate demand curve. Is linear, that means a straight line, and positively sloped, indicating that as the level of income increases, aggregate demand also increases. The aggregate demand line is flatter than the 45-degree line because as the income rises, consumption also rises, but less than the rise in income. This is aggregate demand line. It is aggregate demand line is flatter. This is flatter than aggregate supply. The 45-degree line or aggregate supply line. Because as the income rises, consumption also rises. Income rises, consumption also rises, but less than the rise in income. Less than rise in consumption is less than the rise in income. Next, all points on the 45-degree line, AD is equal to AS, aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. If an economy is operating on 45-degree line, then it is in equilibrium. So if we observe all points on the 45-degree line, this is 45-degree line. Aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. If an economy is operating on the 45-degree line, then it is in equilibrium. We would like the equilibrium to occur at the potential level. Right. For example, for all points below the 45-degree line, this is here. For all points below 45-degree line, this is 45-degree line. For all points below 45-degree line, aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply. This is aggregate demand, this is aggregate supply. Aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply. For all points above 45-degree line, this is for all points above 45-degree line, this is 45-degree line. This is aggregate. Here, aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply. For example, at point A, aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply. This point is above the 45-degree line. So aggregate demand is more, aggregate supply is less. So for all points above 45-degree line, aggregate demand greater than aggregate supply. Next step. Since I is constant, investment is constant, aggregate expenditure schedule C plus I lies above to consumption by constant amount. Since I is constant, aggregate expenditure schedule C plus I lies above to consumption by a constant amount. Here, this is consumption line. So investment is constant, that is added to consumption. Then this is called aggregate demand. AD is equal to C plus I. Right. Next. That is, this is original consumption line. This investment is constant. This investment is added to consumption. Then aggregate demand is C plus I. This is called aggregate demand is equal to C plus I. Next, only at point E with output Y0, economy is in equilibrium. That is, aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. If we observe the panel A, only at point E, that is aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply, the economy is in equilibrium, the determination of national income is Y0, or the determination of national output is Y0. At point A, aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply, no equilibrium. At point B, aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, here also no equilibrium. Only point E, the economy is in equilibrium, where aggregate demand is equal. This is aggregate demand, this is aggregate supply. Both are equal at point E. This is the determination of national income in two-sector model in terms of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Next, in panel B, the Keynesian theory of determination of national income can be explained with the help of savings and investment model or leakages and injection model. This is called panel B. This can be explained with the help of diagram. So draw L shape, mark YOX, savings and investment is measured on Y-axis, income or output is measured on X-axis. This is called investment. Investment is a constant. It is parallel to X-axis. And this is called savings line. This is called savings line. Savings line slopes upwards from left to right, whereas investment is parallel to X-axis. E is the equilibrium point where savings and investment both are equal. Right. Saving schedule S slopes upward because savings varies positively with income. Saving schedule slopes upwards because there is a positive relation between savings and income. If income increases, savings also increases. The vertical distance between C plus I and C is equal to planned investment spending, that is I, which is autonomous and is parallel to X-axis. So if we observe here, this is the vertical difference. This is the C and this is the C plus I. This vertical difference is nothing but investment. So the vertical distance between C plus I and C is equal to planned investment spending, that is I investment, which is autonomous, that is autonomous investment, and is parallel to X-axis. At equilibrium Y0, planned investment is equal to planned savings. At equilibrium Y0, planned investment is equal to planned savings. That is point E. That is point E. Right. Beyond equilibrium level, that is Y2, the aggregate supply greater than aggregate demand. That means X ante savings are greater than X ante investment. As a result of that, inventories increases. This is beyond equilibrium level, that is Y2. So here beyond equilibrium level Y2, if we observe, this is aggregate supply. Aggregate supply is more, this is aggregate demand. Aggregate supply greater than aggregate demand, or ex ante savings greater than ex ante investment. As a result of that, inventories increases. Inventories means stock of raw material increases. Right. Below equilibrium level Y1, below equilibrium level Y1, the aggregate demand greater than aggregate supply. That means X ante investment is greater than X ante savings. As a result of that, inventories decreases. The stock of raw material decreases. This is below the equilibrium level Y1. Here aggregate demand is more, aggregate demand is more, aggregate supply is less. As a result of that, ex ante investment is greater than ex ante savings. As a result of that, inventories decreases. Ex ante means planned or anticipated or intended. Right. Next, since income is either spent or saved, income is either spent, that is consumption, or saved, that is yes, that is y is equal to c plus s. Y is equal to c plus s. The equilibrium will be y is equal to c plus I. Equilibrium will be y is equal to c plus I. So here we can conclude that in panel B, this explains the Keynesian theory of determination of national income with the help of savings and investment model, or leakages and injection model. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and comment.